All right, so this is part 2 of the digestive system intro. If you're assigned this section, that's because we're going to go really in depth into components and anatomy of the digestive system. So, in this lesson, we're going to go over some commonality of an anatomical features found in every single GI tract organ, as well as some special structures that aren't typically considered an accessory organ or a GI tract organ that are kind of still considered key players in the digestive system. Okay, so when you take food into your digestive system, that food is going to be scraping down from your mouth, through your esophagus, down your stomach, and all through your intestine, and eventually out your butt, your anus. And all along that way, it's producing friction and potentially damaging the internal tube of your body. So you need protection against that. You also need to make stuff to kind of lubricate that passage of material from your mouth down to your anus. In addition to that, you need muscles to facilitate that movement, as well as stuff to actually produce all the things that are going to aid digestion. All right? And this is all going to be facilitated by 4 tissue layers. So the first layer found in your GI tract and it's starting from the inside. So the innermost layer here is the mucosa. It's epithelial tissue, actually. So I don't really mention it here, but it is epithelial tissue. And its whole job is to produce secretions like mucus to lubricate that motion and to protect you. The more damaging the thing is as it moves, the food or potential food material is as it moves through that section, or the inner contents are, the thicker this mucosa lining has to be. However, that has a double-edged sword, because the thicker this mucosa, this protective mucosa is, the less you're going to be able to absorb any nutrition that may have been available. So your stomach, for instance, because of its really strong acid, has a really thick mucosa lining, but that also means your stomach actually doesn't do a great job of absorbing nutrition. It's mainly there for digestion, but it's not going to absorb things. All right, your submucosa is a layer underneath of it, and the submucosa has enough space for blood and nerves. And if you recall in the tissues, generally speaking, the thing that can hold blood and nerves and provide space for that stuff, as well as connect the epithelial tissue down, that's connective tissue. Generally, it's loose-ish connective tissue like areolar. If you get a chance to do it in class, it's a really cool thing to actually get fresh organ meat from the supermarket and actually feel the different layers of these tissues in various digestive system organs and actually see how they're slightly different from the stomach versus the large intestines versus the small intestine. Okay, the muscularis is the third innermost layer. So inside our tube, that's mucosa, then there's submucosa, and then this layer right here, muscularis. It's just muscularis. It's muscle tissue, and it's there for movement and motion. It's generally speaking smooth muscle, which you're going to use for something called peristalsis, which will come up later. And then finally, the outermost layer is also epithelial tissue because it's lining kind of the edge. And in this case, it's usually tissue that's going to just help protect the outer of the organ in the cavity. Layers may be thicker or thinner based on the function of the organ. For example, your stomach has really strong acid that can damage other tissues inside of it, so you're going to need a really protective mucosa. It also churns and moves food throughout it really quickly and with great force, so you actually have quite a thick muscularis layer or muscle layer to help facilitate that motion. Your small intestines moves material through it very slowly. It also wants to absorb things into the blood, meaning you want a lot of access to the submucosa. So in that case, your mucosa and your muscularis layer are actually much, much thinner in the small intestines. And we'll learn more about the functions of the small intestine and stomach later. Okay, so just a quick sketch, right? Our innermost layer is the mucosa. Our next layer around that is a submucosa. Our layer around that is the muscularis. And the outermost layer that pretty much makes the outer layer of the muscle when you're looking at it is the serosa. Think of that as the serous membrane, if you recall serous membranes. All right, so now we're going to go over some special structures associated with digestion. So one of them is the mesentery. So the mesentery is special organish-like materials. I basically consider them an organ because they do fit the definition. They're made of more than one type of tissue and they play a great role in your body. But a lot of doctors and nurses classify as tissues, so it kind of exists in the gray area. But they're actually structures that they're special membranous structures found around the digestive system that helps anchor, meaning attach the digestive organ to the cavity, the abdominal or abdominopelvic cavity, so they stay in place. They can be really thin, like the ones that surround the intestines. So around the intestines, there's this kind of weird, funky layer with lots of blood vessels through it. That's considered a mesentery. Or they can be this incredibly thick sheet that sits. There's actually a really thick sheet that sits on the superficial surface of the digestive system. And that one's called the greater omentum. And that actually plays kind of a protective role in your body. It also stores a lot of excess fat. So this is the greater omentum, for example. You're gonna see this if you dissect a whole animal in class. When you initially open the abdominal cavity, you see this huge sheet of fat and tissue that's kind of slimy and slip and slide over the intestines, and that's the greater omentum. That's a mesentery. All right. Finally, there's these structures found throughout the GI tract because you want kind of a doorway between each organ to kind of create separation between the digestive juices and stuff in each. But you want it to be able to open to allow food to move from your stomach into your small intestines when it's ready, to move from your small intestine to your large intestines when you're ready. So the doorways that open and close when it's ready are called sphincters. So sphincters are muscular doorways between your various GI tract organs that kind of separate each one along this tube to control when things can enter and when things exit, and to keep the material, digestive material in particular, in the compartment, in the organ that's supposed to stay in, right? You don't want the stomach acid to get into your esophagus or your small intestine when it's not appropriate. Some major sphincters that kind of come up in medicine quite a bit. So your stomach, because it kind of is a ticking time bomb, it's got a lot of acid in it that's nowhere else in your body, that the sphincters there are really important, and if they get damaged or they're not functioning as they should, the patient can feel a little bit of pain and need medicine to deal with it. If you get a lot of heartburn, aka cardiac, right, cardiac, that's because your sphincter at the top of your stomach isn't functioning as is, and acid rises into the organ above it, which is called the esophagus. Your stomach actually sits right below your breastbone, or right below your breast, basically. And so when you get heartburn, it's not burning your heart, but because as the acid rises out of your stomach and up into the esophagus organ above it, it's near your heart, so you feel this kind of chest pain. That's why the sphincter is sometimes called cardiac sphincter. The name for it is lower esophageal sphincter, the other one, because it's the doorway that's at the lower end of your esophagus entering into your stomach. It's involuntary. You can't really control it. It just happens. You can't take medicine to kind of get the acid to neutralize, so it doesn't produce as much of a burn. Pyloric sphincter is the sphincter at the end of your stomach leading into your small intestine. Again, it's really critical that this functions, otherwise you can damage and it won't do the job it should, or your food won't do the job it should to get digested properly in your small intestine. And finally, the one you're probably most familiar with is the anal sphincter. So almost all the sphincters are involuntary, but your anal sphincter is one of those sphincters in your body that you have some control of. So it controls the exits of poop, feces from your body. And it's got a voluntary section and an involuntary section. So you can kind of control it on one section, and then on other sections your body chooses for you. Meaning you can't control it with a conscious thought, but you control it as long as you're alive. It's got some control by your brainstem, your hindbrain. All right. Key takeaways. The layers that line the digestive tract vary in GI tract organs depending on the function of that particular GI tract organ. For example, mucosa lining will be thicker when there needs to be more protection. That would interfere with absorption. I didn't write it down here, but you need to know the layers as well. Mucosa on the innermost layer, submucosa, muscularis, and then serosa on the very outside of the organ. The mesentery are large fat structures that help protect and attach digestive organs to the body, particularly the cavity. Sphincters provide muscular doorways that separate the organs of the GI tract to control what passes through. Okay? So you should have an idea of the key thing with the mesentery as well, like why it's critical and some examples of them, where they're found, particularly as they're associated with intestines. And then your sphincters, you should have a good idea of the three key players, though the anal sphincter we're going to get into when we go over the GI tract organs. All right, that concludes the lesson. Move on to any other work you have for the day.